The Italian Grand Prix is over, and it was Ferrari who took victory as Charles Leclerc won the Italian Grand Prix for the first time since 2019 as Mclaren threw away yet another race win. But now F1 is heading on to Baku for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which means that once again it is time for my preview and predictions. This is a series where I'll be previewing and then at the end of the video giving out my early predictions for the Grand Prix. If you enjoyed the video then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep, F1 is back at Baku, and this year, the race is much later in the season. Not only is it later in the season, but thankfully it is a normal race weekend after last season's sprint race weekend was a bit of a letdown. But this year, it is looking like the weekend will be anything but boring, as Ferrari re-enter the mix at the front of the field, and this weekend, they should be looking good. The Baku circuit is a bit of a weird one. The first part of the lap is all 90-degree corners. After the 90-degree corners, you need to get through that famous castle section, and after that, the corners start coming thick and fast, before you finish the lap going down a very long straight. The circuit is another compromise type of circuit, as a straight is incredibly long, however you do need the downforce due to the higher speed corners, and also to get around those tight 90-degree corners. Due to the number of slow speed corners and tight corners, I don't expect that Red Bull will be very strong here, whereas Mclaren and Ferrari should do very well. In terms of downforce levels, I expect that the teams will be running the same type of downforce that we saw at Spa, which is a bit more downforce than what we saw last time out at Monza. As I mentioned, the Baku circuit has a lot of 90-degree corners, and it is also a street circuit, which means that we will see Pirelli bring the softest tyres in the range, which is what we saw last time at Monza as well, meaning that the C3 is a hard tyre, the C4 is the medium tyre, and the C5 will be the soft compound of tyre. Even though the circuit looks like one that would challenge the tyres, this is not typically the case, as last year it was a very straightforward one stop, as there was a total of 23 pit stops, with the drivers stopping quite early to get off the medium tyres, and they went a very long way on the hard compound of tyre to take them to the end of the race. This year I expect it will be similar, and we will see a fairly straightforward one stop with them using the medium tyres and then the hard tyres. There will be a second stop if there is a well-timed safety car later in the race, I imagine. With the incredibly long straight, you would imagine that overtaking is very straightforward and easy, but that is really not the case. And you can see that as last year there was a total of just 23 on-track overtakes. To help with overtaking, the Baku circuit features two DRS zones. The first DRS zone is down the very long pit straight, and the second DRS zone is on the exit of turn 2 on the run into turn 3. Even though the straight is very long, the cars do tend to get a little bit strung out due to the nature of the rest of the lap, and with overtaking being harder in general this year, then I anticipate it will be another race where we sadly don't see too many on-track overtakes. Last year, the pole position lap time was a 1 minute 40.203, and that was set by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, as he is a bit of a one-lap specialist around this circuit. During that lap, Leclerc reached a top speed of 335 km per hour. In the main Grand Prix itself, the fastest lap of the race was set by George Russell in the Mercedes, and that time was a 1 minute 43.370. This year, with the race being later in the season and the rate of development this year, I anticipate that the fastest lap and the qualifying lap will definitely be beaten. I just want to say that if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about the midfield teams. For Aston Martin, the Italian Grand Prix was another sign of how they have fallen back, as both Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll failed to score any points at what should have been a good track for them. Aston Martin are desperately in need of Adrian Newey joining them, which should be announced before the Azerbaijan Grand Prix gets underway. Going into Baku, I can see Aston Martin having a close fight with Williams and Haas, as Baku should be a good track for both of those cars too. With Williams' recent upgrades, I expect Albon and Colapinto to be the 5th best team, with Hülkenberg and Alonso being closely matched behind the Williams team, especially Alex Albon. It will be interesting to see how Ollie Behrman gets on this weekend, but I don't expect him to really be in the mix. Kind of like Colapinto, he does still have to get up to speed. For Mercedes, the Italian Grand Prix was an okay race. They were really where I anticipated them to be, which is the third fastest team. They were quite a way away from Ferrari and Mclaren, but they were at least faster than Red Bull. And for Russell, the race came undone at the very first corner when he locked up and damaged his front wing. Going into Baku, I can see Mercedes once again being the third best team. I can't see the circuit being one that plays into their advantages really, as their advantages tend to be at higher speed circuits, and Baku has a lot of stop and start. And there is a lot of tight corners as well, which doesn't really favour their car. However, I can still see them being stronger than Red Bull, due to how Red Bull are when there are slow speed corners. For Ferrari, the Italian Grand Prix was pure joy for Charles Leclerc, as he managed to make the one-stop strategy work while everyone else around him was forced onto a two-stop, and he was rewarded with victory. He stopped early and still managed to nurse the hard tyres to the end of the race. Meanwhile, teammate Carlos Sainz sadly couldn't keep the tyres alive, despite stopping later in the race for those hard tyres. And going into Baku, I can see it being another strong weekend for the team, especially Charles Leclerc. Charles has historically been very strong at Baku, especially over one lap, as he usually does find the limit pretty easily. In general, the soft tyres are a bit too soft for Baku, which means that getting tyre temps shouldn't be too difficult, which should be a good thing for Ferrari. The circuit features a lot of braking zones as well, which has historically been good for the team with this generation of car. The question is though, will they be able to beat McLaren in race trim? Honestly, I don't think they will be able to do that, but qualifying should be a lot of fun for them. For McLaren, they threw another race win away as they stopped Piastri from the lead of the race for a second time. They chose not to take a risk and try and win the race on the one stop, and for teammate Lando Norris, he failed to capitalise on another pole position. And crucially for him, he lost potentially 10 points, which would have really helped him close the gap to Max Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. Thankfully for McLaren, Baku should be another strong weekend for them, and I can see them being stronger in race trim once again. At Monza, they were really struggling with the front tyres. However, at Baku, with all the 90-degree corners, it's all about keeping traction in the tyres and keeping the rear tyres alive. And because of this, with the general low tyre wear, I can see McLaren holding a faster pace for longer than their rivals. They might not get pole position, but given Lando's recent record of converting poles, that might not be the worst thing ever. McLaren like to enforce this Papaya rule, but for me, if they want to win both championships, they need to start favouring Lando. They are probably going to take the lead of the Constructors' Championship this weekend, but they could be in the hunt for the drivers if they do prioritise Norris. Oscar, who is getting very, very close to Norris now in terms of speed, is sadly a little bit too far adrift to really be in the mix for the Drivers' Championship. It's still a long shot for Norris, but there is a chance that they can win both championships this year. Finally, for Red Bull, the Italian Grand Prix was at best an alright race, all things considered, as Max Verstappen lost really the minimum amount of points that he could have lost against Lando Norris. And somehow, Red Bull are still leading the Constructors' Championship, but I fear that this might be the last race where this is the case. Baku is a circuit that features a lot of slow speed corners, which has been a major issue for them this year. Because of this, I can see them struggling when compared to the likes of Ferrari and McLaren, as well as potentially Mercedes. I feel like we are going to need another Verstappen masterclass in order to keep them in the top 5 this weekend, and because of that, I can see them losing the lead in the Constructors' Championship. So with that in mind then, what are my early predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix? Well, I think that the top midfield team and midfield driver will be Alexander Albon in the Williams, as Williams have really improved their car and it looks like a nice all-rounder for the midfield, and that will be perfect for the Baku street circuit. But what about pole position and the top 5? Well, for pole position, I am going to go for Charles Leclerc. Even though he hasn't really had many pole positions this year, I can still see him getting it at this circuit given how good he typically is over one lap at this track. But what about the top 5 in the race? Well, for P5, I'm going to go for Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. P4 will be Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. P3 will be Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P2 will be Oscar Piastri. And I think Lando Norris will win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, because McLaren really need to do it that way if they want to win both championships. But that is my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.